good for them. That is like the worst strategy I've ever heard. They suck. We are a $30 trillion economy, right? We are the consumer of the world, okay? Carney has a problem with us. He gets on a plane and he goes to China. Does he think the Chinese economy is gonna buy his stuff? What did he do? He came back and said, oh, we'll take their electric cars. I mean, is this nuts?
I promise you, I will never sugarcoat our challenges. Instead, I will talk with you directly and regularly about our plan, why we're doing what we're doing, what's working, what isn't, and what we're going to do next. So here's the current situation.
What if the biggest threat to Canada's economy is no longer inflation, no longer housing, no longer interest rates, but the United States itself? That is the question hanging over Ottawa right now, because this fight is no longer just about tariffs or trade paperwork. It is about whether Canada is still treated like a real partner or just a smaller country expected to obey when Washington raises its voice. And Howard Lutnick just made that tension impossible to ignore. When the US Commerce Secretary mocked Canada's approach ahead of the USMCA review and dismissed the idea that Ottawa could play a long game, the backlash was immediate because his words sounded less like diplomacy and more like contempt. That is why this moment matters. It confirmed what a lot of Canadians have been feeling for months, that the old Canada-US relationship is not just under pressure, it is being rewritten in public and not on equal terms. Lutnick's remarks hit a nerve because they landed in a country that already feels cornered. In Washington, he openly attacked the idea that Canada could wait out the United States in trade talks, calling that the worst strategy and adding, they suck, while arguing that America's much larger economy gives it the upper hand. He also went after Canada for trying to open limited trade space with China in a few sectors, which many in Ottawa see as proof that the US does not just want influence over Canada's exports, it wants influence over Canada's options. That is why the backlash was so strong. Canadians did not hear one official having a bad day. They heard a senior American figure saying the quiet part out loud, that Canada is so tied to the US market that Washington believes it can humiliate, pressure, and squeeze Ottawa into compliance. And once that perception takes hold, this stops being a technical trade dispute and starts looking like a test of national self-respect. Mark Carney understood that instantly, and that is why his response was so sharp. He did not try to soften the moment. He did not pretend this was normal friction between close allies. He pushed back directly, saying the United States does not get to dictate the terms of a new trade agreement. And he made clear that Canada is prepared either for serious negotiations or for delay, but not for surrender. Reuters also reported that Carney said Trump himself had not used the phrase entry fee ahead of the USMCA review. But the bigger point from Ottawa was obvious. Canada will not start talks by kneeling. That is a major political shift. For years, Canadian leaders often tried to manage Washington with careful language and quiet diplomacy. Carney is doing something different. He is framing this as a question of sovereignty, leverage, and economic control. And when a prime minister starts talking that way, it means the issue has moved far beyond trade irritants. It means the country is preparing people for a tougher era. What makes this even bigger is that Carney has now openly said Canada's deep ties with the United States have become a weakness. That is not a throwaway line. That is a fundamental warning about the shape of Canada's future. For decades, the dominant view in Ottawa was that close integration with the US was the safest and smartest path, because America was Canada's main customer, its strategic ally, and the anchor of its economic security. But that logic breaks down when the same partner starts using tariffs, threats, and political pressure as bargaining tools. Reuters reported that Carney tied this moment to protecting Canadian sovereignty and even invoked historical resistance to US pressure in a national address. That tells you how serious the tone has become. The message is that Canada can no longer treat dependence as safety. If Washington can weaponize proximity, then dependence becomes vulnerability. and vulnerability eventually becomes a political liability. That is the real danger now. Not just bad negotiations, but a permanent loss of confidence in the old model that governed this relationship for decades. Now look at where this heads next. The review of the USMCA is due for completion by July 1st, but both Reuters and AP reporting suggest delays are likely, and Canadian officials have already made clear they will not make early concessions just to get the process moving. That matters because uncertainty between Canada and the United States does not stay on paper. It moves straight into real life. It affects companies deciding where to invest, factories deciding where to expand, exporters trying to price contracts, and workers wondering which industries are next in line for disruption. When the two most tightly connected economies in North America stop behaving like stable partners, uncertainty becomes contagious. Every sector starts asking the same question. If this relationship is now driven by pressure politics, what can still be counted on? That is where Lutnick's remarks become more than offensive. They become costly. Because the more Washington talks like leverage is all that matters, the more Canada prepares for a future in which trust cannot be assumed, and every round of negotiations becomes harder, uglier, and more politically toxic than the last. And that leads to the most important consequence of all. The United States may think this approach will force Canada back into line, but it could end up doing the opposite. The more Ottawa feels bullied, the stronger the case becomes for diversification, for new trade corridors, for more deals outside the American orbit, and for building an economy that is less exposed to Washington's mood swings. AP reported that Carney defended Canada's position on protected sectors and also pointed to efforts to diversify trade and investment beyond the US, while Reuters separately reported that Canada is already sending a trade team to Brazil for Mercosur talks. Canada cannot replace the US market overnight, and nobody serious is claiming that. But it does not have to replace America to reduce risk. It only has to decide that over-dependence is no longer acceptable, and that is the shift viewers need to understand. Howard Lutnick's outburst was not just another rude comment in a tense week. It was a flashing warning sign that the Canada-US relationship is entering a colder, harsher phase, where respect is thinner, pressure is louder, and the future may depend on how fast Canada can adapt before the old partnership becomes a permanent liability. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for daily updates. Until the next time.